The man was 83 years old when he was brought before the pit. I imagine his hands ached against the rough knots that bound his wrists together. As he looked, he saw the king arrayed in his royal garments. He's surrounded by his servants, his beard stained with tears, his eyes bloodshot. He looked to the older man and said, "I did everything that I could. I tried all afternoon, but I could not find a way to release you." Off in a distance, there were a group of high-priority individuals gathered close together, and they were smirking because their plan had come to fruition. After all, it was they who had encouraged the king to sign that dreaded proclamation. It was their design, it was their plan to have this individual killed. And it was as though they had succeeded. As the sun finished setting, the last rays of light hitting this man and those in attendance, I imagine a gentle breeze began to blow and cut through his robes, his garments, and even numbing his fingers. Eventually, the crowd grew silent, and the king reluctantly gave the nod. And the guards who were surrounding this frail old man, with the butt of their spears, pushed him, and he fell into the pit, hitting the ground hard, his breath being taken away. As a stone was being put over the entrance, the hole of the pit, the older man heard the king's voice one more time, "May God, the God that you serve, deliver you." The light went out. And as it went out, the man picked himself up and saw he was face to face with lions. The king that night could not sleep. Nothing could distract him. Not even sleep itself could prevent him from feeling such anguish over the loss of his friend. As the sun began to rise the next day, he hurried himself to the den of lions. Having the stone removed, he called out and said, "Daniel, did your God save you?" A frail voice, but a voice full of confidence, answered the call and said, "Yes. My God sent an angel in the middle of the night and shut the mouths of those lions because I was found blameless in his eyes." I might have elaborated just a little bit, taken some license with the story of Daniel, but I wanted us to picture what it was like for these biblical heroes of faith, how they were just like us. Daniel in his 80s, can you imagine him being shoved into this great pit full of these ravenous beasts? Perhaps these animals were starved ahead of time so they would have an appetite, so they would be ready when he was cast into that pit. Nevertheless, we read of individuals, of men and women in God's Word who are so full of joy. They were so full of gratitude, and even when they were confronted with death itself, they still believed that they had victory in Jesus. And I think about, where is our confidence? Where is our faith? How can we be more like people who are like Daniel? How can we be like these individuals, young and old, male and female, these people who stood before what was wrong, what was sinful, and said, "I will serve the living God"? See, this morning we're continuing our discussion of the last generation. That was the theme early on in this month. You know, last week we looked at avoiding the way of Cain, how Cain and Abel were the next generation, and how Cain gave into sin in a very similar fashion as his parents, and in his anger, in his pride, in his rebellion, he committed the very first murder recorded in Scripture. Well, it's important for us to teach our children, to teach the next generation what to avoid, but we must also be instructing them. We must also teach them to serve the God of the impossible, to teach them of what God is able to do, how God can rescue, how God can overcome, and what it means to have a blessing of a special, dynamic relationship with God. We read in Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 27, "Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is anything too hard for me? Do we believe that today? Do you truly believe that this morning, that God is able? I want us to look at just a few different principles by which God is able to overcome this morning. And perhaps we can not only learn to grasp and embrace these truths, but we can also pass them on to our children, understanding we serve the God of the impossible, the God who overcomes, the God of those who are without, the God of those who are weak, the God who is full of love. And we're going to begin the discussion with salvation. We're going to talk about salvation here in just a moment. But I do want to emphasize what we read in Daniel 6:23. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Do you have that trust this morning? Let's look together. Hebrews chapter 7. Hebrews chapter 7. Let's begin with verse 22. Hebrews 7, verse 22. This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Let me ask you this question. As we talk about, first of all, that God is able to save us completely, why do you read the Bible? First of all, maybe I should ask, do you read the Bible? But if you read the Bible, why do you read the Bible? You know, a lot of people turn to God's Word because they want to be inspired. They read God's Word the same way that they may read some of the great authors in our history. Maybe like the way they read Shakespeare. They just like the way that the Psalms are. They might find comfort. They might find encouragement, but they don't really consider the Bible to be the Word of God. They consider to be just another invention of humanity, full of mistakes, full of its issues, full of controversy, but they still find it to be an important piece of our history. Is that how you read the Bible? See, when I read the Bible, I read it because I'm looking for something. I'm looking for someone. I'm looking for the true and living God. I'm looking for communion, for a relationship with Him. I'm looking for that fellowship, for the answer to the reason why we have strife, the reason why we have chaos. Most importantly, Jason Campbell, I read God's Word because I'm looking for rescue. I understand that I'm a sinner. I understand I've fallen short of the true living God's glory. I've fallen short of my purpose. I've fallen short of my humanity, that I rebelled against Him. And I asked myself, can God really save? I mean, does God really understand the things that I have done? Not just once, not just twice, but time and time again. I've lost count the number of times that I have sinned. Can God really save? Can God really overcome my sinful problem? Did you read Hebrews 7? Let's look at Hebrews 7 again. Let's pick it apart. Let's fully understand, first of all, Jesus is part of the better covenant. He is the better priest. Why is that? Well, as we read in the book of Hebrews, we do read about the priesthood, and we read how Jesus is superior. In fact, that is the theme of Hebrews, is superior, of better, that Jesus is better than, and you fill in the blank. But we read in Hebrews 7 that there was an issue with the priesthood, and one of the issues was the fact that the priesthood were full of priests who were sinners, that they had to answer for their sin first before they answered for the sins of others, and the second reason was priest died. And once a priest died, they had to change hands, a new priest would come in, and so we see that Jesus is superior. First of all, He is the perfect sacrifice. There's no blemish in Christ. There's no stain in the life of Christ. There's no sin which He committed. There was no deceit found in His mouth. And so we know Jesus is perfect. But here's the second point. Jesus never dies. And what I mean by die, yes, I know that he died on the cross, but he was brought forth from the grave. He was brought forth from that death. And now that he reigns forever. And since he reigns forever, that idea that he is unalterable, his priesthood is unalterable, it is valid, and it is continuous. Consequently, what does that mean? Well, that means because of the things that were discussed, here's the conclusion. Consequently, Jesus is able to save to the uttermost. I love that uttermost because that includes me. That includes my problems. That includes addictions. That includes issues. That includes shame. That includes guilt. That includes embarrassment. Sin. Jesus is able to save to the uttermost. Because he rose from the grave, because he is God in flesh, who now reigns supreme, he is able to save. What does uttermost mean? It means completely, and it means forever. It doesn't matter your condition as an individual. Some people think, well, I'm just so bad of a sinner, nobody could save me. If I walked into a church building, God would strike me dead. Uttermost. Completely, forever. God is a God of power. He is the God who makes intercession. That is why Jesus is able to save. Yes, just our condition, any condition of any sinner, Jesus is able to make whole. He is able to heal. He is able to mend. He is able to make new. But notice, it's not just that we are saved in an instant. It's that we are continually saved. Why? Because he always makes intercession. He continually goes on our behalf before the throne of God. He continually makes the petition. He continually makes the appeal. Therefore, he is always on our behalf, making that intercession. Now we have to draw near to God through Jesus. Don't forget that in Hebrews 7:25. Did you read that in verse 25? He's able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him. We have to go through Jesus. There is no other way that a person can be saved. We have to continually be near the throne of grace. We have to continually be going through Jesus. But as long as we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we can have confidence in our salvation. I want you to think about what John wrote in 1 John chapter 5, verse 13. I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, that you may possibly be saved. You may know you have eternal life. You can leave this morning and know, do I have eternal life or do I not? You can know that. You don't have to doubt anymore. You don't have to question anymore. You don't have to worry anymore. If you're in God, if you're in Christ Jesus, if you're faithful to him, you're saved. When we sin, not that we should. We read in 1 John chapter 2 that when we sin, our great Redeemer, who is our advocate, goes on our behalf to God. That as long as we walk in the light and we confess our sins, that God is just, God is able, God is faithful to save. This is why so many biblical heroes of faith, this is why they had such joy, they had such gratitude, they had such victories, because they didn't spend their entire time questioning and being concerned about their salvation. They knew the one that they believed in, and they understood his power, that God was able to save completely and forever. Do we know the same? Do we have the same kind of trust that Daniel had in that pit, in that den of lions? Well, let's continue reading. Now, look with me. Now we've looked at Hebrews 7. Let's see what else God is able to do. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, God is not only able to save us completely, God is also able to supply us all of our needs. You know, it's that time of season. It's that time of year. It's a time of family. It's a time of good morals. It's a time of good food. It's also a time of presents, isn't it? And when I say presents, I mean we're realizing that there are things that we think we need that we don't really need, but we have to have them because they're on sale. You know, we now in today's society, we have Black Friday all week long leading up to Black Friday. We have great sales there. We have great sales pre-Christmas. We have great sales Christmas Day, post-Christmas, New Year's Day sales. I mean, 50, 60% off. You begin to realize how much you really do need that electric bug vacuum cleaner to help you around the house. How much you really do need those gloves that also double as a Bluetooth device so you can be like this talking to your friends and keeping your hands warm in the cold, because that is exactly what you needed. This has turned from the most wonderful time of year to the most worrying time of year, because we need things, we want things, we desire things, and they end up being cluttered. They end up being in our shed, in our garage. Those things we really had to have. We spend way too much time worrying about the material things. We spend way too much time concerned about objects, about technology, about clothes. We forget that we serve the God of the universe, the God who is above the universe and the God who owns the universe. Christians, we are supposed to be the most giving of all people. But we tend to be in the most, we might like to say, frugal. We withhold gifts. We withhold money. We withhold cheerfulness because we need it. In 2 Corinthians 9, Paul is discussing with the church at Corinth how they ought to give on the first day of the week. And Paul gives them many reasons. I mean, he uses the example of Christ. He talks about how their giving will set an example for other churches. It demonstrates their thankfulness to God. But look with me in verse 6. The point is this. Here's another point Paul makes. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So first Paul says, listen, why do you think you're going to receive all these blessings from God if you're withholding blessings for others? Why do you think that God is going to bless you if you do not have love in your heart to help those who are in need? Second point Paul makes here is don't give reluctantly, out of compulsion. We talked about that in Bible class this morning. How sometimes our children will obey us, but they're stomping around their feet, they're frowning, they're whining, they're oh, this is so unfair. And then after they finish what we asked them to do, they say, are you happy now? Is that the way we want to give to God, as though God needs anything from us? We ought to give with cheerfulness in our heart. Notice here in verse 8, God is able. God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that all sufficiency in all things, at all times, you may abound in every good work. As it is written, He has distributed freely, He has given to the poor, His righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. It is so easy for us to give out of the abundance of our wealth, but when it costs something, that is when we realize how much we trust in the living God. Now notice here, Paul is not saying God will give according to your desire. Whatever you want, whatever you think you ought to have, God will therefore supply to you. Instead, what Paul is saying, Paul has given us so many universals. Did you notice that? God will give you all grace, all sufficiency, at all times, in all things, so that you may continue to serve Him. Paul is not saying that faithful Christians will always have an abundance of wealth in the material. However, what Paul is saying is that God generously supplies us what we are lacking so we can still continue to serve. Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 6. Again, a passage referring to how we worry, we're anxious about things. Jesus said, but seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Jesus taught in a similar fashion in Luke chapter 6, verse 38. Give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Earlier, Jesus had talked about forgiveness. He talked about judging others. And now He said, give, and it'll be given to you. Eric and I, we went out for this movie night we had. We went out and bought a couple big bags of popcorn. I think we bought about 4 bags, big bags of popcorn. And wouldn't you know it, as soon as we open the bag, we realize it's only about a third full of popcorn and 2/3 full of empty air, right? You've been there. You know what I'm talking about. Some people are stingy givers. That's not the way Jesus gives. Jesus shakes things down. He presses things down to make sure you can hold as much as possible. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He continues to pour like a gallon of water in a little tiny cup. Jesus continues to pour till it overflows and it's pouring down into your lap. That is the way God gives. Not just material, but when it comes to wisdom, when it comes to patience, when it comes to love. Jesus is a liberal giver. We had read earlier today, Cliff read for us Ephesians chapter 3, verses 20 and 21. When Paul is writing to the church at Ephesus, he has this prayer before he gets into another part of the letter, the practical side. You know, Paul was like one of those heroes of faith like Daniel. Paul believed in God. He believed that God would supply everything that Paul needed. We read that in Philippians 4:19. Paul believed in what it meant to be content. Paul understood that through Christ he could do anything, that Jesus would strengthen him to overcome. Well, in this letter, Paul is praying that the church at Ephesus would understand the power of God, that they may know the love of Christ, that they may overcome any obstacle that they would experience. And at the end of Paul's prayer in Ephesians 3, he said, now to God who is able to do far more abundantly. That means hyper abundantly. That means as much as you think, and then some on top of that. He's able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think. Now, I can think of a lot of things, and I can ask for a lot of things. God can overdo what I think or what I ask. God is able to provide according to the power at work within us. God is not so far that he does not hear my prayers. He continually works through me. He continually works within me. In this work, God is super abundant. I just think this morning, if we ever struggle with something at Upland, it might be because we don't have enough trust in God to overcome. Whether it's with evangelism, community outreach, benevolence, whatever the case might be. Perhaps the reason why we might struggle from time to time is because we don't understand the power of God. We don't trust in God. We don't trust in God enough to give to him so that he is able to multiply. Not just our money, but our time, our energy, our patience, and our love, our forgiveness for one another. Maybe we struggle this morning because we doubt. We doubt in God's power to supply whatever it is that we need, not so that we can just enjoy life, but so that we can glorify him. I'd like to close this morning by talking about one more point. If you have your Bibles, John chapter 10. John chapter 10. Our time is coming to a close, but let's read John 10, about verse 28. God is able to secure us eternally. He's able to secure us eternally. And it seems like we might have covered this point in the first point of the lesson, that Jesus is able to save to the uttermost. But I want us to focus on the security that we have in Jesus. You know, Jesus warned those disciples, those who are listening to him, that there are going to be many who claim to care about them, many who claim that they could save them. However, they're nothing more than thieves and robbers. They're nothing more than wolves in sheep's clothing. Jesus said, be careful, be wary of them. However, I am the door. You go through me, you're going to have green pastures. I am the good shepherd. I know you by name, and I call you to follow me. I'm the good shepherd. I'll even lay down my life for you because I love you. There are a lot of false teachers out there. There are a lot of false shepherds. There are a lot of hirelings out there, a lot of robbers out there who try to convince you what is good, what is right, what is pleasing. And they only deceive, or they only crave, and they only destroy, and they do not love. In John 10, Jesus is saying, I love you, and I can protect you with the power of my hand. I'm not only able to preserve your salvation, I'm able to preserve you until I come again. Jesus didn't die by happenstance. That's such a false teaching that's going around in the world today, that Jesus tried to set up his kingdom and it didn't really work out, so he died. It kind of was like a plan B and set up the church as a plan B. I want you to read John 10:18. No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This is the charge I received from my Father. This is not a plan B. This has been the plan A all along. That I've come to lay down my life for my sheep. I've come to die, as Mac described, the excruciating death of the cross for you. And I'm able to secure you by the power of my hand. Verse 27, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. Who can snatch us out of the hand of God? Who is more powerful than God? Who is able to outdo him? Who is able to trick him? Who is able to persuade him to let us go? Now again, we can leave the fold of God. We can be the sheep that wanders. But as long as we're in the light, we're saved. We're not only saved by God, but we remain saved by God. The reason why we read about these biblical heroes of faith like Daniel, like Peter, like Paul, like countless others who had a mindset of both victory and gratitude every single day is because they knew that God was able. They knew that God was able to save, that God was able to supply, and God was able to secure their souls for eternal life. I want you to think about your faith. I want you to think about your situation, because you're a sheep and the shepherd's calling for you to come home. Will you listen to his voice? What will you do with Jesus? As a stone was removed from the entryway of the pit of lions, so a stone was removed at the burial site of our Lord. So as God was able to secure, to preserve Daniel in that pit all night long, so God was able to preserve and secure and raise Jesus back from the dead. No bar can hold you too long if you're a servant of Christ. No tomb, no grave can hold you in forever if you belong to Jesus. Jesus offers you eternal life today. He is giving eternal life to you today. If only you as a sheep will hear your shepherd's voice and follow him. God is able. What will you do with Jesus? If you need anything at all, if you need to become a child of God today, be baptized into Christ, have your sins washed away, we can do that today. But it's not within us, it's within the power of God that you're made clean in his eyes. If you're a child of God and you've wandered like that sheep, if you've struggled in sin, struggled in doubt, struggled if God is able, why not come back to him today? Trust in him today as Daniel did, and he will rescue you. If you need anything at all, come now while we stand, while we